and I thank you all for coming. And the first item we have on the agenda is an update on the Woodbridge Estates new application. And Terry Gilbertson is here, and Chris Sullivan from our Land Use Department will give us up to date on that.
Thank you. We've prepared a memo and some attachments for your information.
Thank you.
This is presently, and we have several site plans. We don't have enough for each one of you, but we have certainly enough to share. And this is the second round of a proposed age-restricted facility. You may have seen this, recall some time ago you saw this before. It is presently in front of the Town Planning and Zoning Commission. They approved it in part last time. And this time around, and the particulars are in your memo, I don't want to read it for you. But it has, the particular, this application has 73 townhouses, 64 condominiums, with a total of 137 housing units and 12,400 square feet of retail, restaurant, and commercial space. And it's a considerable parcel, and it's presently under the review by the Town Planning and Zoning Commission. They have referred it to their Architectural Design Board as part of their Village District regulation. And we have also brought some elevations that you might be interested in.
This is the commercial building. There actually would be, there used to be 5 of these in the original proposal. Now there are 4. This one would front on that the green, which you see over here. So commercial building lines. This is C4, C1, C3, and C2 are all commercial buildings, and this is a rendering of C1. So you would have retail space on the bottom, and then there would be 2 levels of apartments above that. They're proposing to have like a loft space in the upper attic area. So the actual second floor residences would be actually 2-floor apartments. And then these would all be, so this is the front, and then this is the back of it. So that underneath in the back, you would see parking along the bottom. And then, so all the tenants that are here would be parking underneath, and then this is the end elevation. So this is typically what all of those C units that you see on there would look like. Otherwise, residentially, you have 2 types of units. The units that are marked on there is V, would look like this. They would be rear loading houses, so that the garages would be in from the rear. Typically, these are the ones that front along Litchfield Turnpike or directly along Bradley Road. So as they front onto Litchfield Turnpike, these in a sense are turned on end, so that this unit at the end where you see a turret would actually be facing towards Litchfield Turnpike, and so that they're proposing that it's going to look like several single-family houses rather than a block of houses. But on Bradley, on the south side of Bradley Road, you would see this whole unit facing Litchfield Turnpike, and along Bradley Road, you would see 2 of these configurations facing towards Bradley Road. So these are the rear-loading ones. And then the other type of unit that we're proposing to use is a front-loading unit. And these are typically along, if you look, they're the units that are along this drive or the road that's on the north side of Bradley, as well as to the rear of the C units. These are front-loading, so the driveways or the parking would be in the front of those buildings. These are different than what we saw under the original proposal.
So they've cut how many units off?
They cut 10 units out.
10 units out?
So Town Planning and Zoning just received this last week. They had a work session last night on it, and next Tuesday night the Architectural Review Board will be reviewing it for the first time. The plans complete sets of plans are coming to them, and they'll be reviewing those before they meet next Tuesday. So, the main difference that you're seeing on here from the ones that were originally proposed in one of the handouts that you have is that planning and zoning had suggested that the original setback requirement from the main roads, which is Litchfield and Bradley, is 75 feet. And you can come closer than that if you ask for and receive a waiver request from town planning and zoning. Town planning and zoning did not grant the last waiver request that they asked for, which was to come as close as 25 feet to the road. This proposal is showing 50 feet, and they also reduced the height of the main buildings, those big buildings, the C buildings, from 54 feet down to 45 feet. So that's the main difference that you're seeing between the original plans that came in and these. That's it.
Do they have to go for a height variance even down at 50, 45 feet? Isn't
No,
there
45 is an allowed height in the Development 1 district.
in a one district? Okay.
So we can leave these here for you. We picked these out of the sets that we have. There are more plans in there, but we figured this would give you a pretty good overview.
But Chris, so they had removed one commercial,
Originally, one of the buildings that they had in the original plan was,
but
had a community base in the bottom. It was a community room where the residents of the active adult plan development could come and, maybe they'd have a fitness center, or maybe a large room where if somebody wanted to have a party, they could have it there, that kind of thing. That appears to be gone from these.
so is that how they lowered the height of the building? Or
No,
is that how they did away with 10
They
units?
did away with one of the C buildings from the original proposal that we got. And then they changed the style of the buildings to these front loading. And so they seem to be closer together than what we saw originally. So that's where I think we've only seen a reduction from 147 units to 137 units.
Did they have, so the number of units there was reduced
By 10.
By 10.
by 10?
But the setback, they met the setback and.
They
Didn't
haven't,
meet the setback?
they're proposing, it's still a waiver request, and planning and
Do
zoning
they have to
still.
go to zoning board of appeals?
No, this is a waiver before, the way it's written, it's a waiver of the zoning regulations, and so it's a waiver before the Town Planning and Zoning Commission. So they still have an opportunity to look at this and determine whether or not the way they're seeing it, does it still meet, the waiver can only be met if it meets certain criteria. So they still have to look at that and see if they, in their opinion, and that's the way it's written, in their opinion.
How does, just help me understand, how does the town planning and zoning commission allow them to waiver a zoning regulation? You have the Board of Zoning Appeals that does that. What's the technicality in the law?
It's written into sometimes the commission can waive itself if it's written right into it.
There's a new set of regulations called the Village District Regulations with a set of standards that calls for design review. And that, for the first time, you're correct, in the normal zoning scheme of things, a planning agency cannot vary its regulations.
Is this the new regulations that went into effect a couple of years ago?
Yes, sir.
They just
I
went into
see, so
effect
they
here.
took, let me see if I understand that. In terms of the new in terms of the new zoning regulations that govern this property, they removed the requirement on a zoning variance to go before the zoning board of appeals.
Only as it pertains to active adult plan
But
developments.
previously, you can't vary our zoning regulations without going to the zoning board of appeals, which is an elected body, and that's technically why it's an elected body. I just wanted to clarify that.
You're correct.
There's a correct, and it has to do with the front yard,
Right, the setback,
the setback.
because that's a variance, because it should be 75. They are now coming back at 50, so that's a variance that they're allowing.
They haven't allowed it yet.
Well,
They're-
excuse me, I'm sorry.
they're
That's a
requesting-
variance they're requesting.
Right.
The first request was a 25, which was
Right.
not
So
granted.
this is a compromise, but it's still, but it's still,
Meeting halfway.
Every other successful development on Bradley is at 75. And we have many successful developments at 75 feet.
right. Help me understand, is this I'm not as I don't understand the new regulations perhaps as I should, but is this the one major difference from what existed prior to that in terms of giving town planning and zoning more power that the zoning board of appeals had before?
It's not an issue with them having power, it's an issue with the concept of the development of an active adult plan development and how, because that in and of itself allows to have more housing than we would typically consider on any parcel, because even here, traditionally, like on Landon Street, you'd be looking at a house on a quarter-acre lot or something like that. Here you would be having up to 10 units per acre.
Again, that's not an issue for this. What is, it is. I'm just trying to understand, previously, you had to go to the zoning board of appeals to get them to approve this variance. Now, that authority has been reduced and transferred over to the town planning and zoning.
I think it's been changed, but I do think that another important feature is the design review by the architectural committee. We've never had design review before.
Right.
And this is quite an opportunity for planning in Woodbridge to be more centralized and more focused.
It is, and to meet a criteria that we as a town want to set, so that you just don't get a building of any size and shape or form or architectural style. So that's good.
We have a very active design review board. They work very, very hard.
Right.
They're
Mhm.
very, very diligent.
By the way, Webster Bank looks beautiful. I think it's really
It's an example
tremendous
of,
improvement.
that's a good example of the design review
Doing it straight,
working.
yeah.
Because they flatly turned it down. They were going to do nothing. And I think you've got a nice little.
Yeah, that entryway is really.
And look at the building that was, that building that was there before was a pretty vanilla, unattractive
That's the
building.
point,
Can't
right?
bring it
Now,
Right.
and now, so it not only looks good, but compared to what was there previously, it's a marked improvement.
Frequently, we find in all land use decisions that sometimes denials make for a better project in the long term.
Oh,
What is being done for the roadway enhancement in terms of sidewalks and street lighting and that element of the development? Did you?
The town plan has a provision that they want to see a sidewalk block that goes down Litchfield Turnpike on the west side, down Lucy Street on the north side, on the east side of Amity Road, and then up to Bradley Road. And so this is showing you a sidewalk system that goes down Bradley Road and then would continue up Litchfield Turnpike. So, and then it also has a provision for doing a sidewalk going up Litchfield Turnpike towards what was formerly called the Lender Building and whatnot, that way. So there is a sidewalk system that's provided in there, and that's the whole point of the village district concept, is to try to make it more amenable for the residents that live in
Do
the
they have
area.
lighting
Actually be able
fixtures too, Chris? Do they have lighting fixtures on that conform to the style that the architectural review?
There are street pole lights, shorter pole lights, and then they would have benches, and
Do they have renditions of what they look like?
I didn't
somewhere-
bring that sheet up with you, but that
Yes.
sheet is there, and
I
you
would,
can go down and.
what I would do, what I would suggest is that maybe you make a copy of that sheet, and then we'll send it out to the board members, because what we're doing here, what they're doing here is maybe establishing a precedent that would be the model for the rest of the area as we build out sidewalks and enhance the beautification.
We'd be happy to provide those materials.
You want 6 sets?
Sure.
We can do that.
And Joe would like one,
Joe would like
and Professor Plattus would like one.
I can
Tony
bring
would
it
like
up
one.
after we're done.
Ed already has 4 copies that he's hoarding.
Okay, can you give us a timeline on this, Terry? I mean, if this were to be, well, to decision, let's put it that way, whatever the decision is.
Well,
Decision-wise, they have to act finitely. They received the application in February. They have to act on it within 65 days, although the applicant can give them an additional 65 days. So we can't go any further than that.
In
What's
4
going to
months.
come, 4 months. So we don't know what's going to happen, but that's the time frame for that. We don't know, they've told us that they're not going to phase the project, that it would be a project that would be done all in one fell swoop. We have not heard with this submission that that's changed.
the Town Plan and Zoning Commission has referred it to the same reviewers that are hired by the town but funded by the applicant. And we're reviewing the changed stormwater circumstances, the traffic. We've also, the Town Planning and Zoning Commission has also asked them to get the approval of the Woodbridge Traffic Authority, which the,
Same process again.
yeah, so.
And the fire department.
And the fire department, because there are
You're
tactical
going through
issues
the
here.
whole process.
They just want to make sure, they've represented that they've met their concerns, but the Town Planning and Zoning Commission wants to officially hear it from those entities to make sure that the concerns have been met.
We think it'll be an abbreviated check, but I don't think it's a square one.
Just
Review.
roughly for the record, what does this bring us in terms of additional revenue per year for the town in taxes? Any idea? What's
Well, the
this?
initial proposal, they said in excess of $1 million. I don't know what this one is.
Okay, so it's roughly a little over $1 million. And if you assume that if there's a trade-off between the size and things like that, it's going to come in roughly the same. One other question, talk about the setback along Bradley. What's the setback along Litchfield?
This is still proposing 50 feet along Bradley and Litchfield Turnpike.
Okay. And does the state, because that's a state road, have to comment on this?
They have to go before the state because of traffic concerns.
Right.
They have gone before the state, and if you look at this plan, you can see that on Bradley Road, they're actually showing there's extra lanes that are on Bradley Road, and what we've heard is that in Litchfield Turnpike, they would be creating additional turn lines at that intersection. And they also wanted them to try to square it off so that Bradley Road would come out directly opposite Bradley Road on the other side of Litchfield Turnpike.
Okay. So that's all something that the state will look at?
Correct.
Do you think that will get done in our lifetime?
The State Traffic Commission study does not really commence until local zoning approval is.
So it's another layer of approval. Once we, let's say it runs the course of four months, it's resolved by June, then it goes to the state for their review.
And they can be concurrently working on it with them. I mean, they've already gone through an extensive review to our understanding with them because there have been those changes that were made.
Do you see anything controversial that lies in the
Well,
way
there's a
of this
couple of
from a
things.
state point of view?
You may know or remember from the last proposal is that the state also reviews drainage. And apparently the drainage is at presently overtaxed. in
That's the sewer
this area.
system?
The stormwater.
Stormwater, what about the sewer?
Sewer, apparently, we've been told that the new sewer authority is prepared to accept the circumstances. But the stormwater is of apparently the piping size underneath Litchfield Turnpike is, at present at capacity, as they say.
Where, just for curiosity, where does that storm drainage run off from stormwater? Streets and property, where does that go to?
The West River.
So that dumps into the West River.
Correct. But it's getting to the West River.
The pipes are not sized correctly?
Not with this development and this sort of increased drainage.
So they may require that additional pipe where they dig up the old and put in a bigger...
They haven't allowed that at all. In fact, what they've done is they've encouraged underneath this area, which they call the Village Green, is actually a subterranean holding tanks that and a high-performing drainage facility that is designed to recharge the stormwater back into the ground.
Wow.
It's like subterranean galleries, and it goes right back in.
of water. That's interesting. Okay. This has been very helpful. Professor, do you have any issues that you want to ask
It
of
was actually
Terry?
already on my notes of things to raise with you. I think that at an appropriate moment, I think we, if you so desire, we would certainly have some comments on the project as it relates to the larger context. And, we review stuff like this all the time. I think it's a huge opportunity for the town, given what we're doing. And I think it's worth thinking about, because I think for the average citizen, if we take this study to completion, it'll probably arrive around the time that this is ready to move ahead, and a lot of people will conflate the two. It will be the biggest development in the area that we're looking at as part of this study.
Right.
And so the more we can feel comfortable that it, as you were saying, that it reflects the standard we'd like to set for the rest of the area, that's a bonus. So I again, at an appropriate time, I'd be happy to make that part of the discussion.
And we also may want to bring the design group or the architectural committee that has put their stamp on, or at least the guidance, on buildings to make sure that it conforms with what standards they're looking to achieve for the town, to understand what their guidelines are, so that we don't work at
For
cost
example,
purposes, or that we complement what they're
My
doing.
immediate observation, just looking at this drawing, is that it's all made out of artificial materials. And I don't know how concerned people in Woodbridge are about that, but some towns like to see new buildings in village districts as much as possible be made out of real materials.
The village district regulations and the regulations that regard the active adult plan development have criteria in them for what they can be made of and how they can be designed, and certainly we can make copies of those for you if you haven't seen them, so that you know what that says. That would probably be a helpful tool for you.
And if you or your group would like to see documents, we'd be happy to.
We actually got a set of the previous documents, which we've had a good look at, but we'll take a look at these as well.
Very good.
And I think it makes it interesting, maybe not right at the beginning, but I think as we go ahead, I think to have a discussion about this relative to what it means, what this kind of development means for the area I think would be very useful.
The traffic proposals and the lane changes that you mentioned earlier, is that with any physical expansion of the road, or is that just simply under the existing?
It's with a little physical expansion, but the expansion, to our understanding, takes place working with this project, not with any other, the residences which are on the opposite side of
So
which
the 50 feet setback is consistent with wherever they end up?
wherever their property line ends up, correct.
We're fortunate to have Senator Crisco here, and I didn't know if there's anything that you might want to comment on, or I know that you've been instrumental in trying to get some traffic issues addressed by the state at the bottleneck, both on Litchfield and Amity, and I know you've been pushing for that study and some things on the state level, but I don't know if you wanted to...
I just think there'll be major traffic problems both on Litchfield and Amity. When I spoke to DOT originally to try to get 2 lanes down right before Starbucks, they claimed that the only way they could do is through taking property by eminent domain, and they weren't willing to do that at the time. So I don't see any solution to it at the present time unless Terry and Kristen has some other information.
Well, we originally wanted to have Judy Gott here
I know.
today to give us a presentation with the status of the studies, if you will, in regard to the traffic problems on Litchfield Turnpike and Amity Road and the interchange to Route 15. And today is a state holiday for those of you who don't know it, so that's why she's not here, but the senator's here, state holiday or not. So at the next meeting, we're going to have her come and give us an overview of that to see how that fits in, and get your comments, Joe, and Themis's comments on that.
But Ed, just bring us up, from what you had said previously, from a discussion with her, just because we have people who are going to hear this back through cable, there's going to be another study, and this is not something that's going to be resolved quickly.
It's not. It's going to be a matter of years before this is addressed. But there's a meeting at the end of the month at the South Central Regional Council of Governments offices in North Haven to address the Route 15 interchange there. And
So-
representatives of the town will be there at that.
So when you say a matter of years, there's going to be another study. That has to be commissioned. They have to find the money to do so, and the state's going to conduct that study because it's state highway. And by the time that study's completed, then they'll get a better sense of what might be options to alleviate that bottleneck.
Correct.
Howard, do we know, are they going to limit the number of cars per condo? Like 2 per condo? I remember they were talking about that parking where it was 1.5 cars
There's 2 spaces provided,
per
parking
unit.
spaces per unit.
These will be people's homes. I think that's very, you can set out to do that, but I don't know how successful at the end of the day you will be.
Okay.
Assume approvals are made, within, let's say, a 6-month period. What's the time frame from construction to occupation?
They haven't shared that with us.
They never did.
No.
What's your best guess? Is it a 1-year construction period before they have everything in place and can start to occupy that property?
Most projects like this are built in phases.
It's interesting that they said it's not going to be done in phase, that's really interesting.
We find it remarkable that this group has indicated that there's only one phase.
From a financial standpoint, from their perspective, I can't imagine them not occupying as they build, so.
But maybe there is some production, or well, you would know, construction efficiencies by getting it all up and not have a site partly open for occupancy and others
No.
not. I don't know.
Clearly there are, but nothing shorter than having, 100 vacant units. And it's in Hamden, it exists, so it's hard to say. The only reason I would think, but here's the building inspector, our building team, is that to get a CO to get anybody in, they need a certain level complete, given the way it's organized. But I think that you believe that it could be phased in anyway, right?
I think there's some very expensive features that the underground drainage facilities are expensive.
To get in even for the first person, that's the thing, it's
Do you think that could be a deal buster if they have to redo the pipes and do some modifications on that storm drainage?
They know about it.
This is proposed from the beginning.
So that's
That
nothing
hasn't
new.
been a
problem. Okay, so that's nothing new. Okay.
How long will they have, let's say they get all their, and I hope they do, get all their approvals. How long is the approval good for? Is there a 5-year window?
Originally, it's a
2,
5-year
3?
permit, and they can
5.
ask up to one extension, or an extension to give them an additional 5 years. So you can have an optimum of 10 years, and that's it.
An optimum of 10. And
Maximum of 10.
let's say that in 10 years it's not built, the country goes into depression, whatever. But it reverts back to what?
Then technically, the site plan approval is expired. and
It's
they
just
haven't
expired and they're back to
been- So they would have the option of coming back and seeking a new permit to finish.
do
the rest of the
whatever.
work. Correct.
How is the 10-year a town regulation under the new?
State statute.
Pardon?
State
State.
statute.
It's a state statute, I see, okay. I mean, what happened to home rule? And they preempted us, okay. Any other questions from anyone here? That's been very, very helpful, and thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll get you a set of the sheet with the details, and then we'll give you a copy of the village district regs, the guidelines, and the rules for this particular type of development, because that also includes criteria for how it needs to be built.
Thank you. Very good.
These are ours, we can.
Those are for you to
Those are
keep.
for us?
Yeah,
I think these are you. I'll take one. My file.
well, my one is a little-
Have one.
I don't think it's
I don't need 2 of these, but,
Yes,
does anybody want another drawing?
If you have an extra site plan, I'll snag it.
Evan, you could have mine too if you'd like.
Well, we'll get it,
If you want
one
more.
set from them, but the site plan itself will be useful.
Good. At this time, we'll move to our next item on the agenda, which is to hear from Professor Plattus, and his topics to discuss are mentioned in the agenda, which is plan of work, a timetable for implementation, and review of some similar reports for towns our size that you have done that provide you with the unique perspective for what makes sense for Woodbridge. This is not your first go-around at this type of work, and we're fortunate to have a person of your experience with your group now working for us.
Well, the only question I would raise as we go ahead, this would be very informal, and I have a little outline to follow, but I don't feel that strongly about it, except that there are a few things that I'd like to cover so that we can move on after the meeting. I've been scratching my head while we were talking about whether it makes sense to start with a couple of examples of recent work that we've done and just get those in the hopper, so to speak, and then come back to what is likely to be a slightly more open-ended discussion of where we're going with this. Because if we start in, I think if we start in with the substantive stuff that affects Woodbridge, we may not leave time at the end. And I'm happy to, if there are things that you see or things that you don't see that you want us to come back to with other work that we've done, we're happy to do that. I have a feeling that once we get into your work, that will become less relevant. At least it should become that less relevant, because really every town in the state, certainly every town that we've worked with, presents a unique set of problems and challenges. And I think while there's the size comparability, size means something very different for a town that functions more as a suburb of a larger city than a town that's up in the northeastern corner of the state that might be the same size but is largely autonomous and doesn't depend for some of its job base or commercial base on an immediately adjacent larger town. So you get my point. But just to so what do you think? Should I quickly go through the couple of examples that I brought? I did two things. One is I brought a couple copies of a recent report that we did for a town that some of you may not know, Pawcatuck, which is actually part of Stonington. It's in the far eastern part of the state. And it is a little, it's not like Woodbridge. It's not terribly rural. It's on a river. It has a little declined industrial area. We were looking at revitalization options, but we did a fairly comprehensive economic development study of that with two other firms, one of which was AMS, Larry Kenny's firm, who's going to be working with us on your project, and the other is a New York firm, Phillips Price Shapiro, which is a very high-powered consulting firm in New York, that in actual fact, in the case of this study, we bought about 2 days of their time. What they were not, Larry Kenny and our team were the kind of core group for that. So I brought a couple copies of that you all can pass around. I think more to get a feel for some of the stuff that goes into a study of this kind than any specific recommendations, which, you know, you'll see proposals for reusing old factory buildings, which we're not probably going to be doing much of here in Woodbridge.
Professor,
yeah.
is this the type of document at the end of phase 3 that
this
we will
is
get?
fairly typical of the format that we've, over the years, delivered printed reports in, with some exception. Now, these days, of course, the real product is digital.
Right.
So it can take any form whatsoever. And sometimes in recent projects, all we've done is hand a disk to our clients, and they've printed copies when they needed to, grabbed images for other reports, and basically it's the most flexible format. But I think a lot of towns do like to have something like this that they can show to potential developers. Or this, one of the things about this report that you should know is that while we were doing it, it actually shook loose a number of major development opportunities. We discovered a couple of sites that they didn't really know they had. And no sooner had we discovered them than a couple of developers swooped in and said, we'd like to do that site. So sometimes, by the time you print the report, it's, you know, you've already, the process of implementation has already begun because the word gets out. But then the report becomes a kind of formal, you know, the director of economic development who's meeting with a potential developer or investor can use that kind of thing. So we'll think about that as we go along, and if we get all the way through phase 3, by the time we get there, hopefully we'll all have a clearer idea about what the best deliverable product should be. But as I say, there's inherent flexibility now. The other project that I brought, as you're looking at that, you can ask me any questions you want to, is actually one that didn't end up in a kind of printed report, but a series of boards that we did this study for the town of North Branford with the Regional Growth Partnership. When Bob Santee was still with the RGP, he approached us about some work that they were doing with North Branford to look at the Route 80 corridor as the DOT was widening in certain places, and to see if there were some opportunities to make what is essentially a kind of suburban and sometimes rural community have a little bit more of a village center. So that goal was not dissimilar. And in this case, we were asked to look at a particular site, which is, if you know North Branford, the site of the old center school, the historic school, and the former town hall. That was not their first town hall, but I think their second or third town hall. And then the town hall later moved to where it is now, further down Route 80. And this site, they felt was a higher and better use for it was as a mixed-use development site. But they didn't want more strip-style development like they were getting characteristically on Route 80. And they asked us to look at the possibility of doing that and to combine that with some prospects for public space. There's an old baseball diamond here that they don't really need anymore. At least they say they don't really need it anymore. So we did a series of focus groups with a steering committee that they had set up in the town for this project, and went on, I think, for probably 6 or 7 months. And at the end of it, we presented a fairly fully developed proposal for that site, upon which they then based an RFP.
But was that publicly owned property?
Yes, it is publicly
So
controlled
it's-
property.
in that way, it's very different than what,
That
they
is,
have a lot more control.
but in this case, they were looking for a private developer to
To
take up,
develop a private-
to develop the property.
Publicly owned.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you anticipate that part of your look will be directed at our old firehouse that's going to be vacated within the next year? Are you moving up into that area, so you're just
We're not
concentrating
planning
in
If it's the commercial, the
Right.
Dev one,
Yeah. But when you say that, I don't want people listening to think that because of that his work encompasses.
We can
that
talk,
No,
we can
that's
talk
why
about
I
it, but
asked
our,
this.
our understanding is that we're pretty much following the outlines of your commercial
Right.
area as
Right.
designated in the plan of conservation and development, with the core being the village district area, actually. And that, the aerial that we've pieced together, there's the Parkway, that's Amity Road, that's Litchfield Turnpike, there's the car dealership right in the middle of it. That's the kind of, here's the site of the proposed village that you have on the table there. So that's Bradley Road. This is the core area of what we're looking at. But don't worry, we're not shy when we think there are things to be gained by looking beyond the immediate area. We are very quick to suggest that to people. On the other hand, we want to accomplish something for you. So, and we already think that there are probably going to be a few real opportunity sites that emerge that might benefit from closer study, that might shake loose then some development opportunities. This is often the case, we find, that if you can get focused enough, sometimes you can really stimulate interest in particular sites where people weren't seeing the possibility of further development or development of a higher quality and standard, and by sometimes drawing pictures of that and just having the discussions that we'll have about that, it shakes things loose. I'm just going to show you this very quickly because you understand that in hiring us, you've hired designers, and we do tend to do our best work graphically. It's not that we don't like to talk, but we do like to make pictures of things. So we look, in this case, at the whole Route 80 corridor and patterns of development, and then we zero in on the site and what its implications are and what it's connected to. And we're already doing this with the study area here in Woodbridge, which is making what we consider to be analysis diagrams that explain to all of us what the character of the site is, what it connects to, what it doesn't connect to, where the opportunities are, where the obstacles are. And some of that is just putting down on paper things that we already know, but I would anticipate that the next meeting we'll have will be looking at some drawings of that kind to get your feedback, to see if we're reading the tea leaves correctly. So we've did a lot of that in North Branford. And then one of the tough issues for them was what the character of the town should be like. So we brought a lot of examples. It seemed to us that they were okay when they were doing a residential scale building. They knew what they thought a residential scale building should look like, but a slightly bigger commercial building, people got confused about that. And so we were looking with them at some contemporary buildings, but also at old mill buildings, not all of which look like gigantic brick boxes. Some of them are actually kind of clapboard, some of the oldest mills in New England, and there's been a recent architecture based on that. And from that, we started to develop a vocabulary for the commercial center. We went through, I would say, about 10 different configurations on that site, most of which included a new village green, a new public space for the town that we hoped would, in other words, in the RFP, the goal was to have the developer get the right to develop the site commercially, but that they would set aside a portion of that site as a publicly accessible open space. And that way, the town of North Branford would get double dose out of it. They would get both new taxable property. These are some of the options that we looked at, and we analyzed each of them. And so this was a fairly compact project. Pawcatuck project, we were looking at the whole center of town. I mean, it was a very broadly based, fairly ambitious project. And you know, there is no typical about any of this. You know, we're working right now on a $250 million downtown plan for New Britain, Connecticut, which is obviously nothing like what we're going to be talking about here, and doing a neighborhood study up in Bristol, where we're working with a community immediately adjacent to the downtown area and looking at primarily residential issues. So there's a lot of diversity in it. But I think the core of it is that we try to help people visualize what it is they're getting into and what the opportunities are. And not just the people in town, but obviously people who might want to invest in the town, which is a key issue here, as I understand it. So, and
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned focus groups before, that
Yeah.
you engaged in some focus groups. Who participated in these focus groups?
it varies from community to community. In the case of Branford, we often ask, North Branford, I'm sorry, I keep saying Branford, we've worked in Branford as well. We've often asked a group of people to help us put together a steering committee for a project. Now, the proposal that I wrote for you all basically said this, we understood that this group was our client and effectively the steering committee. But one of my questions for later on is just that, which is to say, in the course of this, are there other people or groups that you would like us to meet with to get their ideas, concerns? We're happy to do that, but we're going to take our direction from you on that.
I would think one of the groups would be the design group that that exists.
Mini
that are
architectural
giving-
review.
Architectural review group that has given some substance to this direction for Woodbridge Estates.
And the residents of the area.
And the residents of the area, of course.
Yeah, and when we get to that, because I think we're going to do a little bit of work with you all before we get to the point where we want to open it up. But I think you also have to tell us what the local culture is in terms of how best to interact with those groups. You know, we can call a public meeting of some kind and hold it, you know, in some appropriate place, hopefully central to the neighborhood, and say, you know, at 7 o'clock on Thursday evening, we'll be there with our preliminary ideas, and we'd like to invite the residents, and we can communicate with them in an appropriate way through the press or even through leaflets or that sort of thing.
I think we can arrange that. We can, there are
Okay.
people we can contact that will spread the word.
Do you ever do a survey?
We don't do a lot of surveys ourselves. We have worked with groups that do surveys. We're designers, and we can do that, but it's not a real good use of our time. If you want a survey, I would be inclined to organize somebody else to do the
I'm a
survey.
sociologist.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out all the ways you gather information
Yeah.
and how much the community at large has
We use the Charette
influence.
approach, as we used in Hamden and Derby.
Well, we've done millions of charrettes, and they're
Perhaps you could explain for the people who might be listening what a charrette
For
approach
the
Yeah.
people who are here.
and for us that don't know.
basically, it is a way of getting a lot of community input and a lot of work done in a participatory way in a short period of time. And to some extent, it was pioneered in the context of outside groups coming to a community for a short period of time, doing a lot of work, and then going home. We do it usually as part of a more extended process where we do work leading up to it, and then we're around after it's over, because we think that is, in the long run, more effective. And as I say, we've done a lot of charrettes around the state over the years. The term, just so you'll know, comes from from 19th century architectural education as it was conducted at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, where the way you got through school in those days is you did a series of architectural competitions, and the morning that the competition was due, the school would send around a little cart, a charrette, a small cart, to collect the drawings from each of the studios to take them back to the school. And it was, I understand, customary for students who were finishing up their work at the last minute to actually jump in the cart and finish their drawing in the cart on the way over to school, thus the term en charrette, in the cart. And that's become a kind of standard term at architecture schools, when you're working under the gun, staying up all night for the last couple of days. And now a lot of design firms organize workshops, basically workshops, that can be as short as an afternoon or as long as 3 or 4 days, where you basically find a place where you can work and hold an open house and invite the public to come on in whenever they want to, see what you're doing, and comment on it. We did a one-day charrette with the Dwight neighborhood in New Haven last year. We're actually, in May, probably going to do a charrette in the Jordan River Valley in Israel, in the land between Israel and Jordan, on a project there, which should be an adventure because we're going to be in tents in the desert. But that is always a possibility. That's one way of getting a lot of people there. It takes a certain amount of effort and resources to do it right. You have to organize going in. You have to get your design team together, which is going to be more than the 3 or 4 people I have staffing this project. To do a charrette well, you probably need, depending on how many people you're expecting to come, you probably need a dozen or more professionals on one side of the table in order to interact with the public as they're coming through. You can't do it with just 2 or 3 people. So it takes a special, to do it right, it really takes a special kind of effort. But the term gets used more or less loosely. I don't know if you participated in the Hamden ones. Leslie Crean, who's the planner there, worked for me for several years, and so she did a bunch of charrettes with us. That charrette, though, was in some ways, I would say, more towards a workshop where there were presentations and soliciting feedback. Typically what we do is we actually set up in a gymnasium or a large room, and we have 6 or 7 workstations where there are people actively drawing and working on the project as you go along. They did some of that in Hamden as well. Anyway, we can certainly keep that as an option, knowing that it may change the way the budget works or the way the resources are allocated, because again, it's customary to feed the people and, you know, organize the thing in a professional way so that everybody can focus on what they're trying to accomplish there. But that is particularly, I think if this boils down to 3 or 4 or 5 opportunity sites or issues that we really want to focus on, sometimes a charrette can be a really good vehicle for pushing that forward.
Good.
Anyway, back to the timeline and the work plan. Just to review, the proposal that I sent to you all envisioned a 3-phase process. You have authorized the first phase of that, which was envisioned as a 2 to 3 month phase, which I take it is now begun, even though we've long since begun gathering information so that we're in a position to do this work. So allowing for the usual lag in all of this, we were saying January through March, roughly 3 months for phase 1. We're in mid-February, and I think probably realistically we're talking February through mid-May or into that period to complete phase 1. Now, usually when we're doing these projects as a kind of continuous process, we don't really go time out, phase 1's over, now it's time to start phase 2. In fact, as other clients of ours will tell you, we often forget to bill for the first phase until we're well into the 3rd phase. But in this case, we're perfectly comfortable with the idea of making phase 1 a kind of autonomous effort, getting to a stopping point there and deciding, having you decide whether you want to authorize further work. As we initially described it, phase 1 was really an analysis phase where we gathered all the documentation, including talking to all the people that we felt we needed to get input from, and then came back to this group several times with our developing ideas about what the issues were facing this area, had that as an ongoing discussion, and out of that analysis began to identify some core strategies that we felt would be appropriate responses, design responses, development policy responses to the issues that we had outlined. And then from that, that would form the basis of phase 2, which would be a design phase, where we would generate, as we did in Brantford, but at a bigger scale, 3 or 4 or more options that you and others would consider for what the approaches to those issues might be. Different strategies, different vocabularies, different densities in some cases, and by the end of that phase, we would be in position to say, we've got a plan here. We've got, this is the consolidated strategy that we would like to envision and represent in a final report document. Then the final phase would be our preparation of the deliverables, the visuals, and the text that went with the final report. And some of you had asked, I think quite appropriately, how we expected to use our economic development consultants, AMS. What we're comfortable with and what Larry's comfortable with is having some of his involvement in each phase in the project. So one of the things I want to talk a little bit about this afternoon is whether you have some immediate questions about potential market issues affecting this area that you want Larry to take an early look at to inform our investigations as we go forward. Let's be honest with ourselves, we don't have the resources in this project to do a comprehensive market study. But fortunately for us, Larry and his firm have worked enough in this area on an ongoing basis that they have a lot of gas in the tank already. He will, based on what we direct him to do, he will probably acquire additional data as it may be necessary. For instance, let me take an example that's relevant or irrelevant, I don't know. If we said to Larry, one of the things we're thinking about in this area is a small hotel conference center. Is there, based on the data that you can look at, a market for that, and is this a suitable place to do it? He would then gather information and comparables to address that specific question. If we said to him at a more general level, hey, how much more commercial space could this area support, and what kind? I mean, that's an obvious kind of question, but that's a big general question. And I think he's ultimately got to help us address that. I don't think his answers will be definitive in that respect, but I certainly hope to get some direction in terms of what the possibilities are. Because I'll stick my neck out and say, I feel, as some of you I know do, that this is an underdeveloped area. That this is a critical area in a very, very strong location. And depending on some more specific goal setting, I think there's some possibilities to do a lot more with this area from a commercial point of view than is currently being done. But it's probably going to take exactly what we're doing, which is a more comprehensive approach. Because if you leave it to individual developers on a project-by-project basis, you may or may not come back in 10 years and see what you would like to see there. So I think those are the kinds of questions that we want to put to Larry, and I want to get him involved, and he's eager to get involved right away. And one useful way to do that is to prime the pump by saying among ourselves, here are some things we've been thinking about as possibilities in this area. Let's get Larry to take a look at them up front and see what his conclusions are, what his advice might be in that respect. So we want to build some of his time into phase one, although with the budget we have, we can't give it all to him. So we have to keep some of it for the work that we need to get underway. So that's.
Do you want us to go around the?
Well, let's come back to that. I want to go through the whole. So
we should keep this in mind because we're going to be asked to answer this question maybe in 15, 20.
But phase one's going to go by relatively quickly unless we want to slow it down, which means that over the next 3 months, let's say, there'll probably be the opportunity for us to all meet together, probably maybe 4 or 5 times, and one of those times will be a kind of wrap up. So I think you want to think in terms of making
When
good use
you
of that.
mentioned something that was interesting
Yeah.
because you don't maybe differentiate a timeline between phase 1, 2, and 3, and you say they sometimes merge together. When do you think, to have a continual flow of this project and not stop it and then start it again as we move from phase 1 to 2 to 3, when do you see are reaching a point in phase 1 that we could start to say, this is moving along, meeting our expectations. What we want to do is get to that phase 2 design, and therefore we can work to say this is, let's move ahead under these conditions, so we don't have that point where we stop, then we have to get refunded, and then we get started again, and we lose that continuum.
As soon as you're ready. We work with clients who we know to be far less able to come up with the resources than towns like Woodbridge, and usually work on a fairly trusting basis that they will, as they go along, find the funds. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I agree with you. I would, particularly because our most productive time starts at the end of April. So this is perfectly timed for us if we don't stop. We'll be getting to the end of phase 1, and just at that moment when we kick into phase 2 and phase 3, if we keep moving, we'll have maximum staffing levels because school's out and I hire a bunch of people during the summer, and we get, I would say, in the course of a year, probably 2/3 of our work gets done over over a summer.
So we get good leverage on our investment.
You get good leverage and you get a product. I think you, rather than getting caught with everybody going back to school in September and finishing up, sometime in December, I think the timing would be perfect to have a product by the end of the summer, which means that when everybody comes back from holiday, you'd have something to show people right away in the fall. So that's worth thinking about, but I'm at your disposal.
You said that we're going to meet several times, 4
I hope so.
or 5. I think we should sort of, when would you want either a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen so that they are advised, or what do you want us to do to help the Board of Selectmen understand how they are getting money for their investment, how they have an opportunity to make an input, because they're going to be the ultimate decision maker on where we're going with this. How do you see us working with you
Well, it would
guys?
seem to me at the end of phase 1 would maybe be an appropriate time to do that, to give them an
Yeah,
overview.
I think that's fine. I think when we, as a startup here, I think it's a good thing for us to have, to develop a working relationship. This is a nice sized group. We can all sort of see each other, and everybody, I think, will have a chance to participate. It may well be that as we go along, several of you, now you'll have to consult your town attorney as to how this plays out. We are always happy, and this is a very efficient way to move the process forward, to have 2 or 3 of you drop in on us at our workshop in downtown New Haven and sit around our table while we're kind of mini charrette, if you will, where we'll have the paper rolled out, and that can be extremely productive. But every town has different attitudes about delegating, the chair or 2 or 3 people to be a kind of executive committee or steering committee to meet with us with more frequency. But we are open to that. And in fact, you'll probably find that there'll be times when I call somebody and say, hey, we'd like to show you something, and it won't make sense to convene the whole committee. Can somebody come down tomorrow morning and take a look at what we've done?
Nika?
From our perspective, is there a particular process or forum that we follow to incorporate opinions of the residents in terms of?
I think the process will be an outreach program or some sort of event or two that would allow participation at some forum with the residents, so they would be properly informed of what's going on. They would be asked, maybe we'd have a mailing to the house.
We did that with the flood, that whole area there. When we had a meeting here in the town hall. We had about 40 people at 11 o'clock on one morning to talk about problems associated with the flood. So we can do that.
Among the things that we're going to take a good hard look at in the first phase are things that you've already been talking about this evening, like traffic and parking, which is critical to the functioning of this district. And I think there are some local things that can be done in that district, quite apart from what the state DOT decides to do, that could improve the functionality of the district considerably. There's a lot of underutilized parking because it's not shared parking, it's parking that's specific to particular shopping centers and businesses, so you get a lot of contiguous asphalt. And when you get up high and look at an aerial photograph, and what you see is apart from the car dealership where they're parking all their product, you see a lot of unused, at almost any time of day. That doesn't mean that they'll always be exactly the, if you talk to business people and property owners, they never have enough parking, and because they always want that space right in front of their business and usually being occupied by one of their employees. But this area, I can tell you already, is an ideal candidate for having a somewhat more coordinated parking plan that would benefit everybody. And I think that also relates to the circulation of traffic. For example, that there are certain areas here where it's not just that there are too many curb cuts, there are no curbs. So people circulate back and forth freely between the street and the parking lot with no distinction between one or another. It's just kind of the Wild West, and they move around. And not only is that unattractive and very unfriendly to pedestrians, it's not very efficient in terms of it's like everybody on a given morning on a street decides to back out of their driveway at the same time. It does, it's not an efficient way to manage things. So I think that we're going to take a good hard look at that, so we don't just have anecdotal information. You have, as I'm sure you know, and you've already alluded to it this evening, you have a classic fundamental conflict in this area, which is that you have an area that's structured by regional arterial roads that most people, or certainly many people, use to make fairly long distance commutes from home to work, back again through the region, that passes through what is effectively your downtown commercial district. I don't know how often people refer to this as downtown Woodbridge, but I think one of the ways we can have an interesting discussion is to say, what if we think about this as downtown Woodbridge? There's not really another logical candidate for downtown Woodbridge. This is the biggest concentration of commercial uses, mixed use really, that you have in your community. And as soon as you say that, I think you start to see the conflict between regional traffic and what is meant to function as a local district, commercial district. And as I say, you go to any town in Connecticut and see the same thing, where a state road, whether it's Route 1 or 44 up in the Litchfield Hills, becomes Main Street in a town and comes into contact with businesses that are doing kind of local business, with pedestrians in many cases, with cars that are maneuvering for parking spaces for shorter term and longer term stays. All of that is already going on here, and one of the tough things that we'll be called upon to mediate is that conflict, because every one of us does both, right? We both use this as a route from one place to another, but periodically we also become customers in this.
Would you also add the concept that once you label it downtown Woodbridge, people in Woodbridge think of themselves as living in a more rural residential area. And once you start to commercialize it, you're starting to deal with maybe residents that say, time out a minute.
Well, I think that's why I say I think, it's faster for me to get feedback by being provocative. And so I'm not insisting that at the end of the day, we decide this has to be a classic downtown. It'll never be a classic downtown, but it is as close to a downtown as Woodbridge has, and I think part of the discussion we need to have is whether you want to nudge it more in that direction or back up from that to become something. I mean, it is already also the least rural part of Woodbridge.
Sure.
And I think from a perceptual point of view, it's right on the New Haven line.
Right.
So many people, I think, many New Haven people probably are not even aware when they've crossed into Woodbridge. It's
and vice
just,
versa.
and vice versa, it's just a commercial district to them.
Right.
Now, once you start going up, well, the good news is there's a natural division because of the topography, both along Amity Road and the Litchfield Turnpike. As soon as you start going out of that core area, because of the topography, you immediately get into areas that are not so suitable for commercial development. So what you could make a fairly sharp distinction, which has often been a problem in towns where I used a term before, strip encroachment, which is usually used to refer to traditional Main Street areas that have been invaded by highway-oriented uses. And so the traditional, I mean, if you know Madison, for example, and their kind of classic little Main Street, you go to one end of it, and you can see there the 7-Elevens and the gas stations and the things that work more like strip uses that have started to encroach on that end of the street. And there's not a kind of clean division at that point. But these are technical issues, and we can talk more about them as we go along. I'm just warning you that there's a discussion to be had where balancing, and it's always balancing, the ease at which regional traffic moves through a particular area and gets up to cruising speed, and the ease with which local businesses can do what they want to do and you can use this area as a legitimate commercial area, that's going to be a balancing act. You know damn well that as soon as people get to the light at the nasty old intersection that you were talking about before, they slow down. They have no choice but to slow down. But one of the things that backs up traffic, and again we're getting into technical areas, is when you allow traffic to move at a certain pace and you stop it all at once. Where if you start slowing it down and stop it incrementally, you get a lot less of the dramatic buildup at one bad intersection, for example. I mean, so there are ways of distributing that some towns have explored in fairly radical ways. For example, Milwaukee a few years ago took all the streetlights out in their downtown area, every single streetlight, replaced them all with four-way stop signs. And the mayor did this, and everybody thought he was a little bit mad, but it turned out in a way that it actually kept a better flow of traffic going, well, in the case of that downtown area, because why? If a pedestrian pushed an on-demand crossing signal, one pedestrian, you didn't have to go through a whole cycle of lights in order to get that one person across the street. People stopped at the stop sign, the pedestrian crossed, and then the traffic continued to move. So there are ways of dealing with these issues that we may or may not want to consider. The other thing that we're going to do, I know, in that first phase is take a look, or a good hard look, at your zoning regs and your village district regs, and see if we think there's ever anything that might, at the end of the process, need to be added or tuned up to make them work a little bit better. We have some experience with this. We wrote the second set of village district guidelines in the state of Connecticut, so we've sort of been involved with the village district legislation from the very beginning. And I have mixed feelings about it, but I think it can be a very good tool for accomplishing certain things. Yeah.
Is there any thought of looking at encouraging more residential on top of commercial? So more like taxpayer type.
Like mixed use.
Well, it's more the old style Main Street, which is taxpayer, which is we have the commercial on the bottom and residential.
This is always an opportunity that's worth looking at. Why? Because it makes for a livelier district. You know, if you look at small and large downtowns around the region and around the country, what's brought them back in recent years is actually more residential development. And so while the department stores are not moving back into downtown New Haven, there are enough people living there now that it supports a level of street life that we didn't see 10 years ago. So it has that benefit. The other thing it does is it makes more efficient use of things like parking, because typical businesses and typical apartments, because we're usually talking about apartments for people who, you know, one or at most two people, that's not family housing in this region. They have different peak parking demands. And so the residential parking is able to take advantage of the commercial parking. You don't have to add more parking overall in order to accomplish that. So it's an efficient use of the resources that you have. And finally, it's a way of, if you allow business owners to do that, it can be a way for them to increase the value of their property. And sometimes when they're mixed, the one reason why mixed use is such a good thing is because when you get a downturn in one sector, you may have steady income from another stream that keeps that business going in between.
So will you then look at the zoning regs? I don't really know what the height restrictions are there, but to actually encourage this type of development?
My guess is the height restrictions are not the problem, that there are other, we will take a look at it, but usually it's not so much height restrictions. It has to do with zoning, with the underlying zoning, and with parking regs.
Okay. And I assume you also look at sewer and water access. I don't know what's down there.
Yeah, as much as we can. You know, I mean, we don't look at it.
No,
But if you know about it, we'll ask you about it.
Okay.
It seems like one of the challenges would be just to get a group of diverse property owners and business owners on the same page what have you used to effectively do that? And-
Well, I think focus groups are a good way to do that. If people hear that you're involved in a planning process, most of them would rather have something to say up front. There are always a few who prefer to wait till the end and then shoot holes in it, but there's not a whole lot you can do about that. So the more people you can bring to the table as part of the process, I think the better read you get on. I mean, just listening to you all discuss the other development this evening, I learned an enormous amount about where you're coming from. Because I start to understand what people's issues and concerns are, and so I'm happy to sit in a room full of people and listen to what they have to say.
Is there anything unique about what you've seen so far that in any way, shape, or form provides additional challenges?
No, I don't. I mean, over there, yeah, it's a mess.
It is a mess.
I mean, it's. I mean, let's be honest. It's got there. For somebody from the outside, it's a frustrating area to negotiate. Most of the streets don't go through or cul-de-sac or jog as they cross other streets. There's no real center where you get oriented and say, from here I understand where I'm going to the next place. It needs. We're looking to discover if there's a kind of latent structure to it that we could boost. In other words, one of our techniques is we sort of look at it and say, there's a little bit over here and a little bit over there, and if we hook them up, they will work together as a larger whole. So I think there's some real challenges for this area. It doesn't have a strong image. It is not the Woodbridge that is near and dear to most people's hearts. When you move to Woodbridge, you drive through that area, but you don't. That's not what people identify with. If you were trying to recruit a new superintendent of schools or somebody from the outside to move into your community, that's not the first place you would sort of show off as Woodbridge. We'd really like to find some things that over time could be accomplished so that that area would start to be different, but a positive, real positive part of the community.
One concern I have, and I like everything I'm hearing, by the way, but just given the earlier discussion with the 55 and up, I think it's likely that all their final approvals won't be in by August. We won't know, and yet this plan, our project here, we're hoping to wrap up by August.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm not going to go away. I mean, you have some negotiating.
but that's the single largest
Yeah,
project.
and
You know
I
what
think
I'm
you have.
saying?
I think you have some leverage with that project because it's not as of right. They need a variance on setbacks, and they need design review approval, and usually that's a fairly wide-ranging proposition. And so,
Design approval of what?
through the village district process, they need
The architectural review.
Review board has to go
The
through.
boards have to sign off on the plan.
And so I think that, I think that will give you, some ongoing leverage with the project, and the other thing is, you're Woodbridge, and I think that you should generally see yourselves as in a strong position with potential developers, as a desirable community, a desirable place to be, so that you don't have to. I think there are some towns in Connecticut that we all know that feel if anybody wants to develop anything at all, bring it on. They're not gonna argue with it because they've been so starved for development for so long. They're in a semi-desperate situation, and that's certainly not the way one perceives Woodbridge. So I think that there's a real opportunity, and this is something that we love to do and be involved with, which is that process of give and take, which was alluded to earlier by your staff, who are quite right. Who are quite right that the whole thrust of these things is for it to get better for everybody. And I think it is going to be good news for them that you're doing what you're doing, right? Because if it's done right, it will increase the value of their investment, because it won't just be a standalone proposition. it'll be something that down the line is connected. I mean, if I were, somebody talked about cars per unit before, and one of the things that we try to do now is to make walk developments I mean, this is, you've heard this is standard now, smart growth. Judy Gotten, the Regional Council, has promoted this approach, and quite rightly so, which is that if you can develop in areas that have things commercial going on, you can actually decrease the number of trips that people might make for convenience store visits and that sort of thing. This is exactly the demographic, in my experience, that would just as soon on a nice summer evening walk to a restaurant or walk to a store rather than get in the car and make an extra trip. So
Some cities are starting to market themselves as walking cities. Was something in the Times this week? Was it Milwaukee or?
the
Walking is a.
The cities that will do well going forward are cities that have taken care of the pedestrian environment and also bicycles, believe it or not, because a lot of young professionals, entrepreneurs, companies coming out of I mean, Silicon Valley is a classic story. You know, they all did it in suburban garages in the first generation. In the second generation, they all want to move to town where there were plenty of coffee shops next to the business where they could ride their bike to work, and you know that's changed the landscape of a lot of the area.
And to support that, you know, the Leeds registered the green building, and you get points as you go, you know, go along, and some are silly and some are very involved. But one, I don't know how many points it's worth, but it's if you have bicycle racks, you know, on your site, you get a point or two or whatever, half a point or whatever, but it's really to encourage people not to use fuel to get to work, so you're right, pedestrian is sort of like the way it's going.
You'll see all kinds of strange things happen in the next few years. I mean, there are some Venice Beach in California, in Los Angeles,
The Beach Boys.
has passed a golf cart ordinance, which allows golf carts now on city streets. And you drive through, this is classic automobile country. You know, this is along the waterfront, just south of Santa Monica. And people, you know, instead of buying a third car, they buy a golf cart. And, you know, for going to the corner store or, you know, they hop in the golf cart and they tool over and it costs them nothing. I think we're a long way from that in the Northeast, but smart cars just went for sale in the United States after all these years in Europe. So there are going to be some things that change. One of the questions I want to raise, we can talk about any number of things, but I want to come back to this question about what we asked Larry Kenny initially to start to take a look at in terms of market analysis. If people have ideas
So
about
do you
that.
want to spend some time going, or what do you
I
have?
just have one question.
Yeah.
So when you are going to go back and look at the plan, you're going to look at this lot as if it's still vacant land?
Well, I know, I mean, I think we can look at it that way, but I think one of the things that we would want to help you all do is to have a discussion about how close to right that scheme might be. You know, in my opinion, it is not a bad thing. I mean, I know these architects and developers, they're not local, but I know their work, and I've seen it in other places. And I think that, you know, this is a classic new urbanist style development, and I think it's where a lot of new development is going. And what's good about this one is that it's not out in the middle of nowhere. It's on an infill site where it has the potential to connect to other things. It's mixed use, not monolithically residential, which I think is always a good thing. It creates a sense of place about it. It's not just the lights don't all go on and off at the same time. So I think you've got something to start with here, and you know, I think I do believe that there's a real opportunity to make this work for you. But we could have a theoretical discussion about where you'd actually, you know, if you were starting from scratch with a site like this, what kinds of things would you do, where would you locate the little green that they've done in the middle of the project, which is a nice thing. I mean, again, 15 years ago, you would not have gotten that sort of thing in this kind of development. You would have got all driveways. You know, this is a much more, if you compare it to the classic development, cluster development of 10, 15 years ago, this is light years better.
Can we assume that they have done, you're talking about market studies, that these developers have done a market study?
I'm sure to get the money, to get their money from investors, they had to have a market study.
So that shows us that's a positive.
It would be very interesting to see what it turned up, because they obviously think there's at least this much unmet need, and I don't think they could get any denser than what they've gotten on that site. So it may well be that their study shows that there's quite a bit of additional unmet need that might be a stimulus for other sites and other developments.
Just so, because we have people listening to this discussion, the market study may be a demographic study of the population over 55 or will be over 55 for a period of years that will be in their sites wanting this type of unit.
Yeah.
And it's not just in Woodbridge, even though obviously that's
It's all
one
over the
town,
region.
but it's in Orange and New Haven and Hamden and all the drawing areas of the region.
And it's a diversified market, because some of that demographic will want to move downtown. Some of that demographic will want to move to Florida. You know, there are going to be a variety of choices, and this site is an interesting in-between choice, right? It's in what we would project as a small village center, very convenient to downtown New Haven, but not in downtown New Haven, so probably a lot less expensive than downtown New Haven, a lot easier to park than downtown New Haven. So, but you can't walk to the movie theater.
Yeah.
Yet.
I think there's a lot of history with this development, with the site. Over 8 years ago, I was told that this was going to come in. They were going to, that this developer would push this through Woodbridge. It's taken them this long to acquire the parcel to get this far. So I'm not quite sure how much research really went into the decision making, because they just were convinced that we needed this type of housing.
Yeah. Well, you know, other projects that we're involved with range in size, but I think, again, most banks, most investors would expect some market analysis. I think most of us understand that this demographic that we're talking about is rapidly growing all over the country as baby boomers retire or you know, become empty nesters, and you know, in many cases sell the houses that their families grew up in and are looking for choices like this. I was in Ridgefield last year. I don't know, a very beautiful little prosperous community in Fairfield County, where a developer is building something quite similar, a little smaller, little cluster of townhomes right in the center of Woodbridge, so that you could, of Ridgefield, so that you could walk to the library, you could walk to the stores. They have a nice grocery store right in the middle of town. These were condos that were selling, I think at the time, for something like $1.5 million. But you understand that people were selling, the people who were going to buy these were probably selling $2 or $3 million worth of house and downsizing, but not, they didn't want to downsize too much. So people within communities make those kinds of choices. I wouldn't be surprised, I'm just guessing, you all probably know better than I do, that a certain number of the people, if this gets developed, who would move in here are people you guys already know. Absolutely. Who are doing exactly the same kind of thing. They don't want to leave. They don't want to leave Woodbridge. They don't want to pay the taxes on a, great big house on 5 acres on a fixed income, and so this is a choice that they would find very attractive. So what you're talking about, and I think this is important to understand, a lot of times in doing developments of this kind, you're making more choices available to people who are already in your community, would like to stay here, and are having changing expectations about what their lifestyle is.
I'd also think too that that they must have given a fair amount of thought to it, because they could have pulled the plug or deferred development for the combination of the money crunch and having to get credit for this, the fact that they had to go back in a way to the drawing boards, which would have given them an opportunity to say, maybe we don't want to go through with this for economic reasons or whatever they might say. And third is there has been a significant amount of development of these senior centers, senior living centers, in recent years. So the market, we hear, is becoming a little more saturated than it might have been 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah.
All that is positive to the developer side, that they really have made a commitment here, and that's encouraging for us.
Yeah. Let me point out one more thing as we're going along here. We've sort of tentatively entitled this study Woodbridge Gateway District, because we do think that this area functions for a lot of people as a gateway to Woodbridge. So it's maybe downtown and gateway at the same time. And one of the things that you all know, but we do it so often, we take it for granted. This exit is from the Parkway is one of the major entrances, not just to Woodbridge and Bethany, but to New Haven as well. And a lot of people get on and off the highway at that point. And I think one of the things we would like to look at is what Woodbridge looks like as whether they stay here or not, as they get off in Woodbridge, perhaps to go to New Haven, in that sense. And I think there's some opportunities right there that we're starting to think about, where there are some successful properties, not surprisingly, because it's a high volume area, but they could work together, I think, in a probably more exciting way.
Time is
Yeah.
running. Should we go around? Oh, I'm
Sure.
sorry.
Have you had a chance to review the village district guidelines?
We're not yet. We're going to do that. And I should apologize. I know some of you know this. We had the employee who started this study with us took a semester off, and so we've replaced him with an even better person who's you'll meet, who's fantastic. This is a guy who's already got a professional degree in architecture, who's come back to Yale to get an advanced professional degree in architecture, and he has a lot of work experience, and he's going to be terrific.
Who is that person?
He's actually from Kenya, but he went to Notre Dame. His name is Mwangi, and a brilliant guy, and you'll like him a lot. But he's just getting his feet wet, right, reading through the zoning ordinance and the village district and the plan of conservation and development.
This would be a question I think more for Roger and Ed. Is it fair to say that Alan's group will have the opportunity to give their input to the formulation of our village district regulations or revisions to make sure that they somehow incorporate the ideas and visions that they have, and that there's a parallel impact?
We will certainly do, yeah. We won't be shy about that.
Yeah.
I think the fact that you've designated it a village district is a good tool to start with, but all the choices still lie before you, which is in a way exciting. What you mentioned before about the streetscape elements in this new development, absolutely the right thing to do would be to interact with them so that the palette that they establish of fixtures and sidewalks and benches and street trees is one that you feel comfortable extending, because that's exactly what you want to do to start to give a sense of identity about a place. If they've done one section of Bradley Road, eventually you may want to see the whole of Bradley Road treated as a more unified
One of the good
thing.
things about it is, because it's so large and they are professionally spoken, they really have, unlike us, they have photos of everything, and product detail. So it's very easy. It's all just there. You could look, you could see, you know what it is, and make your decisions. It's all laid out. They know what they're choosing.
It's not only Bradley. Remember, they face on
It's-
Litchfield,
Oh,
so
yeah.
they face on a major artery. So it's not like
Right.
some street that's hidden from a
Right.
volume of traffic that's going to be.
Remember, it's the thing, like, to get that square, go back to the old Colonial Village Square of Lucy Street, to
Sure.
do the whole block is a concept that they had in mind, the TP&Z of the Village District, which is very interesting.
Right, before we go around to share our thoughts on market, let's just pick up on what Herb said, because I think we're a new guy on the block. Now, you got the town planning and zoning, you got the design group that's already weighed in on this, and then all of a sudden, we come to the table.
Yeah.
So I'm sensitive to the fact that we're going to be a partner with them, but I don't know how they may view us, or what our role is, and how we sort of fit into what they have already decided or they think is appropriate. So I want to, I guess, exercise a little caution here in terms of how we interface with them, and that we do it sooner than later.
Yeah.
Because the sooner they understand what our objectives are, and the fact that we want to understand what they're doing, because our plan is as big as maybe what some of the groups are, that has.
Well, I think if we go back to where we were in one of our earlier meetings, and we talked about ourselves as a marketing arm, and if we back it up, we really didn't have a lot to market at the beginning because we didn't have a plan. And that's what got us to this point of we need to develop a plan so we have something to market. And if we use that as our basic pretense for our existence.
And we're going to get a professional opinion on how best to market. So it's just not a group of people making a judgment, but we have a group of professionals guiding us in this process. Jody, you had
There's clearly sensitivity, needs to be sensitivity on this issue. But I think the fact that Professor Plattus is here, and it's Yale that we're enlisting, and the fact that they've had so much success around the region gives us the stepping stones to be able to bring it to, and bring him, I think, to the committee. I think we need to bring you to TP&Z.
No, and I'm happy to do that. It's on my list.
That's why I said
Yeah.
you need to do it sooner or later.
Yeah.
I'm not, all I'm saying is I want us to go out, not with a distorted view of where we are in the process, but understand we're trying to build consensus, we're trying to complement what they've done, and we're trying to do that with the eye towards how we can maximize the use of that space in a very coordinated way, using direction from the professional. That's going to give us guidance.
At the end of the day, we're going to want to draw some pictures that we leave you with that clearly have to be at a comfort level for all of these groups together. Because if they're going to be useful, they're the things that you want to show potential developers to say, that's what we expect. Not to copy, but the usefulness of the kind of work that we do is, it actually helps developers. Because a lot of times with an architectural... A lot of times with an architectural review process, the developer's sitting there trying to guess what the town's looking for.
Sure.
And they can use their resources more efficiently if you've already done some work that you can point to and say, that's what we're looking for.
They don't like surprises, so the sooner we can get them that model that they can work with, I think the better off.
I think we have to use a little bit of our lobbying skills, because I think we need to bring it to the Board of Selectmen. I would be worried if we go out to the community before we go to our own community, which is the governmental bodies.
Sure. I think what I said earlier, at the end of phase one, if we can, make it that finite. Once you get to this point of the ideas you're developing are core strategies, you said before, then that's, I think, the time to have that discussion with the Board of Selectmen.
Who's on the
I
architectural
think,
review?
let me pick up on that if I can. I think you want it before this.
Well, I think we need to at least, not to bring the full presentation, but I think before we go out to the community and solicit even the focus groups, because that is going to be public, and we could be viewed as not having included our partners in this. I think we ought to just have, small conversations with our partners and say, this, we just want to bring you up to date, we don't have anything right now, this is what we're doing, and we're going to come back to you with what we found out, but we don't want you hearing about this simply
That's why I agree with you. I think that's part of the process, and because we're now moving into an area as a commission that hasn't moved into these issues that seemingly have been addressed and discussed, albeit on a more limited basis than what we envisioned, I think we need to move into that dialogue sooner than later.
Does the architectural review group have a track record yet? I mean, have they?
This is their first go-around.
No, their first go-round was Webster Bank. You remember how we brought that up?
Oh, okay.
That was actually their real first.
And that was a renovation project.
That was a
Right, the minor-
renovation project,
Oh,
but
yeah.
it was their first, this actually, I think you're right, Ed, they went to them first, and I think it was all okay. Webster Bank was the first project that actually got accomplished. You know, everyone could visualize.
You know, it's a
the
bank with
impact.
no drive-through.
Right.
Right,
So, I mean, that's interesting.
right, isn't it?
So that means all the more important for the location, right? Even without a drive-through.
Zoned for exactly though, isn't it?
Well, they did some.
That was part of the
things with
problem, I
the-
think, was, I don't know the details.
I think the deal, originally it had one drive-through, but sort of a deal, the owner owns both properties, where Scoop This is, and so with those tenants, certain things were provided that prevented the drive-through for now.
Perhaps we can have, we can figure out who our partners are and which boards we need to be talking to. You know, if we can have a list of, if we could all have a list of people on the Board of Selectmen, people on the TP&C, people on the architectural board, then we can, as we encounter members of our community, say, by the way, we're going to be coming to talk to you because we're doing this really interesting thing. And we can start the discussion that way.
Maybe at the next meeting for each of these groups, that we could be included on their agenda. So one or two of us, or all of us.
Well, I think in the Board of Selectmen's name, I can't speak for them all, but I think we need more than this.
I'm not saying for the board
Well, the
yet.
Board of Selectmen's already voted on it.
I think more to
On
TP,
funding.
a town planning, and
Okay,
to
to
the
introduce it.
architectural review group. That
Absolutely.
at least we make an introduction. Now, maybe you would like to accompany us, I don't know if that's premature, but I do think we need to at least break ground with these groups sooner than later, so they don't get well, what is this group doing, and they hear a distorted view.
Isn't it a given, though, that we're working
And even
within the existing regulations, the zoning regulations of Woodbridge? We're not out to change those.
No, but there may be certain things that we.
You might want to tweak some of them, yeah, but we're not looking for any confrontation here. We're trying to make this work. That's what we're trying to do.
I think what
you're trying to communicate
And if they
is-
hear that, Ed, then they're not going to jump to the conclusion that we
We
want
need
some
to
wholesale
understand what our
renovation.
mission is,
Right.
and how it doesn't conflict with what they're trying to accomplish.
Has there been no communication dialogue so far? I mean, people have their...
Again, we're
This
just
is the
getting
first
started.
substantive meeting we've had.
Sure.
Well, in terms of informal communication within the town, the fact that this commission
Sure,
exists...
we had a
that we're
discussion with the
pursuing-
Board of Selectmen.
They
approved it.
voted they knew about it because they approved the
Right.
expenditure of funds. They know about each of the three phases. But there's one thing, the board, I think, understands what we're doing. And because Ed has been here, thank goodness, to hear this firsthand, he shared that with other selectmen. I'm not so concerned with the Board of Selectmen as I am with the other two commissions.
And also, I think ZBA has to be brought up to speed, because to the extent that there's any variance that's applied for.
And I'm getting the impression that they don't have to go, you missed the meeting here,
Okay.
I'll brief you
Okay.
later. But there's some new regulations that bypass the ZPA.
I understand, but for, not just for this property, but for any property within the district we're looking at, I think ZBA has to be, let into the
And
loop.
that has to be clarified from what, for example, the setback is a variance.
Well,
They don't have to go
we
to
can maybe
ZPA.
streamline this, but I think the easiest way to do this is for you to get on the agenda of the TP&Z and come in with Roger and yourself
I'm happy to do
and make a
that.
report. Try to get them together to come to one of our meetings. They go to enough meetings as it is, so
Well, and
that's going to be more difficult,
And
so.
when we work with towns, it's very typical for us to start with one group. Sometimes it's with planning and zoning, sometimes it's with an architectural advisory group, sometimes it's with an economic development group. But ultimately, to be effective, you interact with all of them. And you want to establish a relationship where people feel, I mean, we wrote the village district guidelines for Madison, and we get calls from them all the time, what do you think of this proposal?
I like your idea. I think we should do that.
TP&Z and ZBA and what other group?
And the architectural review.
Architectural Review Board,
The
yeah.
intent is basically just to let them know what we're
Exactly.
doing.
Introduce yourself,
Exactly.
exactly.
Okay.
Again,
Just
so that they don't jump to the wrong conclusions, that we're out for wholesale change, we're off on a tangent
That's
of
not
our
our
own.
mission.
We're not
Right.
doing
It's not
that.
our
And that's
It's
not
not
our
our mission,
mission.
we're not chartered to do that.
Right.
Well, the foreman-
Why don't, because of the time, do you want to, Professor Plattus, go around and
If
sort of
people
have
have
us
some
here?
thoughts about it, just so you know, what I'm hoping to do the next time we get back together, and we'll figure that out, but it could be as soon as 2 or 3 weeks, if that's appropriate for you all. The middle of March is spring break, and I'm away for a little while. But what I'd like to do at the next meeting is we will come back with some sketches that, for lack of a better term, start to develop a theory of what this area is doing or not doing. And it'll be I hope it'll be a lively discussion. I'm sure it will be a lively discussion. I know enough about this group already to know that we'll have identified some places that we think are problems or opportunities, and we can have a really substantial discussion about whether we're on the right track, and what we have discovered, what we haven't discovered, what other things you want us to take a look at. Because at the end of the day, I think that this is one of the things that we like to do at the end is we like to leave you with a couple of things that you can do right away, within a year. Other things that maybe are kind of 2 to 3 year horizon, and then other things that are looking 5 to 10 years, but are still worth looking at, because the opportunities sometimes come along when you least expect them, and you want to be ready for them. I mean, the best posture for towns to find themselves in after going through a process of this kind is that you're proactive. You've actually gone out and identified certain opportunities that you would like to see taken forward through private investment or a combination of private and public investment. And so that when a developer comes, you're not just in a reactive mode. You're just not saying, yes, we like it, no, we don't like it. But rather, we've thought about this, and here's what we'd like you to do. For example, if somebody comes along and does a piece of a particular street, to be able to say to them, and yes, one of the things we expect is that you will choose your landscaping and streetscape from the following options that we've developed, so that it'll fit in with the overall concept of what you're doing.
Why don't, before we move around, and we probably will move around sometime today before we leave, how about the 5th or 6th, that first week in March?
Probably okay.
Is that something that might be agreeable rather than wait to the 2nd or 3rd week in March? If that's something that you want to come back to us and meet again, let's move our March meeting up maybe to the early part of March.
Well, I'm also here the 2nd week in March. It would normally be the...
That may be problematical for me, but I would hope that maybe we could do something if it's agreed. If not, then
I can do late in the day on the 5th or the 6th.
I can do the 5th, but not the 6th.
Okay, then why don't we try tentatively, we'll see if the room can be available. I'll speak to Jerry and where we'll meet. Let's say it'll be the late afternoon again, if that's okay? Or do you want to make it evening this time? What's the pleasure of the commission?
Evening is better.
Evening after 5:30 is good.
Can we meet at a 7 or 7:30? Is that
all right for you,
possible
Jerry?
for
That's
that
not
go
good.
around with your group?
Yeah.
It should work.
How about 5:30?
Or 5:30 or 5:30 or 6?
You're
That's
cutting,
too tight.
yeah, I took, is that all right for you?
Yeah, 5:30 is great for me.
Okay,
so-
that's good.
5:30 on the
5:30 on the 5th. Okay, good. Now do we want to go around the room?
Can I just ask a question first, real quick? When this commission first started, we were talking about driving revenue taxes. And I just want to make sure that, because I'm thinking two things now. I'm thinking revenue, I'm also thinking about we're creating an environment for the community, and those two may not be all one and the same. And I'm okay with where we're going, but outsiders may look at it and have varying opinions. Do you understand what I mean?
Sure do.
And I wonder how much of an issue that is, and do we need to address
I
that?
think one relates to the other. I think you generate revenue because you're attracting businesses and you're
I understand
occupying
that.
land and you're developing in a meaningful way, consistent with what our residents want. I don't think, because, again, we have to put into perspective, we are a town that relies overwhelmingly on taxes from residents.
Right.
We're not going to change that. We'll ease it a bit, but I don't think we can ever lay the claim that we're going to be the committee that's going to spawn development to such a degree that the taxes for the residential group of homeowners is going to go down. So with that, we have to balance our drive to find development, land, businesses that want to come to Woodbridge and have that area look pleasant, and it's the type of businesses
Orderly development.
that would be consistent with what our residents want.
I'm
And I
okay
don't
with
think
all that.
that's inconsistent. I think that's they
As long as we're
complement each
careful how
other.
we communicate that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point.
Along those lines, actually getting into what you were looking to get into as far as the market analysis is
Then you
concerned.
want to start.
I'm very much, my question was going to be related very much to that, in the sense of, is there statistical evidence that would support to a business owner? If I'm a business owner, I want to know that my business is going to improve. If I'm a resident, I want to know that either my taxes are going to go down, which is not likely, or my community, I'm going to have an improved community. Those are the things I'm interested in. Is there market analysis information that based on things that have been done in Connecticut or elsewhere, support and actually lend to that fact? And
I mean, are there certain kind of businesses that are,
well, more along the lines of what Barry's saying. Yes,
Can you demonstrate increased tax revenue through the
Exactly.
project?
or along those lines. Can you demonstrate to the business owners that these types of projects have actually led to an increase in business and things like that? I'm not saying that it has to be positive in every case. I'm just saying that seems to me where a market analysis would start in terms of.
well, I mean, classically, what the market analysis would look at is what sorts of new businesses would likely reinforce and improve the core that you've got. So they start, if you're doing a comprehensive analysis, I don't do this for a living, but I work with people who do. They'll look at the mix that you've currently got, and they'll say, okay, starting with that, what else is needed? What would galvanize that particular mix? What are you missing? And is there the surrounding market in terms of disposable income, in terms of access, that would support those kinds of things? And it can get very specific in some cases.
Is that what will be done as part of this, or?
Well, again, I think we don't, we're not going to be doing a kind of, because it's not that scale of study, we're not going to be doing that kind of global analysis, but I think if we ask intelligent questions of our consultant, we'll get some feedback that will be supported by statistical data. Now, that will not necessarily immediately translate into, it's going to, you can calculate what it'll do to the tax base if you develop a certain area at a certain level, but it won't necessarily give you a sort of overall well-being indicator. But there's plenty of comparables for stuff like that. And I think there's no doubt that certain kinds of commercial development in an area tends to improve, to boost surrounding property values, residential property values, other commercial property values, and other kinds take it in the other direction. And there are a number of factors that then come in outside the market analysis. If you get to the point where you overbuild, overdevelop, and it has a negative impact in terms of traffic, to the point where people avoid an area, obviously that's not so good. Although you should only have that problem, right? I mean,
We have traffic without.
When I drive out on Route 1 at Christmas time, I sometimes wonder why anybody does that, but you know what? They do it.
Everybody.
So because there's a range of options for shopping there when people are doing lots of shopping or shopping of certain kinds. And I think that there are indicators, and different businesses have some have very precise formulas, particularly national chains, that tell them exactly where they want to be. Sometimes it's indicated by who's already there, and they know that if so-and-so's already there, they want to be there too. In other cases, it has to do with a catchment area that they want to capture in one way or another. Grocery stores typically have we've worked with Stop and Shop a number of times over the years, so I happen to know that they have extremely precise formulas about where they should be located, but there's a certain amount of give because they're a local company in terms of how they develop a particular site. Let me take an example. Every community I know now wants not another super Stop and Shop or another 7-Eleven, but they want that thing in between. They want the Trader Joe's, they want the Whole Foods, they want the kind of boutique grocery store where you can get the right stuff. And if you say to somebody, an economic development consultant, because they hear this all the time, can I have a Trader Joe's in this area? They can give you some advice about that. And so you can be quite specific about something like that. I mean, I think we sort of know the kinds of things that you don't want. Some of that's in your plan of conservation and development. I think you already have a kind of anomalous big use here. That's an important part of the community, so you probably want to work around it, and that's a big automobile dealership. That is probably...
We have two, really. We have the automotive dealership in the 55 and over between Brighton and Old Laurelwood and this estate. And that's the reality. Now, the question is, what services that? That's, I think, going to be part of the marketing plan. That
People tend not to move to an area because there's an automobile dealership nearby. Doesn't necessarily make them avoid it, but it's not something that if we were starting from scratch would we say, let's go out and get a couple more automobile dealerships. That might not be on our agenda, but if people do you have my email address?
Yeah.
I mean, I would love, as you think of things or have conversations with people, to hear from you, because Larry's sort of standing by waiting for us to get going on his part of the work.
It's just always kind of been intuitive with doing development down there or wanting to do development down there. You explained it, you clarified things in my mind, how the town has traffic going back and forth, and then there is a little bit of local town. My experience is Woodbridge is really broken up. I mean, the people that live in Ed's part of town, I think, are as likely to Orange,
Right.
or as likely to go to 34 to do its local shopping as I, who live on this side of town, come down to us. And the real retail that has been successful down there, it is really supported more by the businesses than in Woodbridge, because we have this very, more by the businesses than by the residents. And so that as the office builds up, as businesses builds up, there was a greater need for retail, and hence this idea of the mixed use and so forth, right? But now, so that's a thought that I'd like more clarification from him about, if that is how it probably does work there. But then now this other thing is, for the first time, we may have this very dense residential, and that pulls something probably very positive into it. Does it mean?
What did we say that was, 10 units an acre?
I don't know, it's 17 and a half acres and 100, it's over 10, isn't it?
That's what you said, it was over 10.
147 at 37.
Anyway, it's dense for Woodbridge,
It's
it's not
dense.
terribly dense.
Dense,
Yeah.
it's dense, well, it's dense housing for that area, right?
Yeah.
So just my question to him would be, what does that do for the need for retail? What does that do for the need for office? Is there some sort of way to work that? And like we talked about the dealership, people don't move because of a dealership, but I've gone to plenty of them, and you do like a coffee shop next door while your husband's killing about 5 hours. You're able to do something else.
Yeah. No,
Jody has to leave.
I have to
You
run
want
to
to
my son.
make a comment?
We haven't discussed it, we have discussed it at the first meeting. I know that there's the Main Street partnership with CLMP, and I don't know if there's any way that you can help us to possibly tap into any funds that might be available.
I'm on their board.
Okay, good,
So-
good.
So I know a lot about the Main Street program, and we can talk a little bit
Okay.
about it. it's not so much, I mean, they do have funds, but in order to access those funds, you have to make a pretty substantial commitment and investment on this end. The good thing about that program is that it forces you to be very focused about what your goals are and how you go about doing things, and you have people looking over your shoulder as you do it to sort of make sure you're on the right track, and there are a lot of national resources that they bring to bear. In fact, there are different levels of affiliation with that. The Main Street Center now has a program where you can be an affiliated community and get involved in their workshops and in some of the stuff they do without being a full-scale Main Street community. I do know that Westville Village is getting ready to apply to be a Main Street. Normally, you think of Main Streets as being downtowns of a town, but the village is going to, I think, put in an application for that. And so as we go forward, we can talk more about it. And by the way, you know, if we're looking to kill some time sometime, it's not killing the time. John Simone, who is the director of the Main Street program and has been now for a number of years, is a really inspirational character with respect to talking to local business groups, talking to communities to sort of push the Main Street approach, which is all about mixed use and all about creating walkable village centers and that sort of thing.
Do you think what we're talking about here kind of ties into that whole Main Street partnership
It could.
idea?
It could. I mean, they're all, it fits all sizes. You know, classically, it came out of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So it was meant to use preservation of older town centers as a marketing strategy. But preservation is not exactly the central agenda, I think, with respect to your area. But increasingly, both the National Trust and the Main Street program have branched out now, and they're working with suburban communities, rural communities. So it's not a kind of one size fits all. But I think you know, going through this process may give us some ideas about whether that's a suitable.
Does anybody else want to have any comments on the marketing side to finish up what you're looking for in the way of input?
I think your remarks about a possible hotel are interesting.
Well, I just threw that out, but I mean, obviously on the New Haven side, there are a couple of pretty rundown motels that had better days behind them. One of them happens to be where I stayed in I won't tell you, when I came with my parents from Louisville, Kentucky to look at Yale.
All right.
New Haven Motor.
Well, that was a premier place in New Haven.
It was called something
I should say
different.
maybe it still is.
Go there and to Les
To some.
Go there and you go to Les Shaw's. You can have a great break. That's what.
But, the area is still pretty substantially underserved.
Is there, are we kidding ourselves, is there a difference between being on the other side of the parkway, which is Woodbridge, and the whole, maybe security side of it that could be attractive?
Well, I think
is that a big differential?
without pitching the negative side of the other side,
Right.
I think you can use Woodbridge as a community that people think of as being a very attractive suburban/rural community. If you had, say, a small meeting facility of some kind that was easily accessible to the parkway here, it might actually be a very attractive business for somebody in combination with a restaurant and a certain number of rooms. There's enough going on in this region that it's relatively easy for good, accessible hotels to keep themselves full enough. I just don't know, but I'd be happy to put that one to Larry.
I think in light of what Ed said, I think that would be a question, and then you take a look at where it might fit and how much area they need in terms. I know I was at a meeting with the Arts Festival people, and they were saying one of the impediments to their growth is the lack of hotel space for the groups that want to participate. And, believe it or not, there is an interest in the bus tour companies to come to New Haven for the Arts Festival in June.
Yeah.
So it's all interconnected. You can have a great festival, but you have to have the support facilities to grow it and to make it even better.
Yeah.
So those are issues that I would hope, I mean, those issues meaning how to use space, whether
It's worth
hotel
looking
or-
at, it's worth looking at, you know, we frequently get inquiries from,
You gotta go. I think we should wind this down.
the trick is to have a site that's, you know, because when you get that, when somebody comes along, I mean, we had this a couple of weeks ago with respect to another town that we're working with. Some hotel developer showed up and wanted to go right away. And there was just nothing that suited their size and their, so, you know, you want to have an idea of what you're looking for and what's available and what the, where it could go.
I suppose with the hotel, I mean, do we have a site there that would be, you know,
Keep our eyes open. Keep our eyes open.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much for,
Thank you, very good.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to.
what should be on the agenda for that meeting.
Good.
Thank you, everyone.
You want these back?
Good to see you.